Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. Want to give you guys a quick update for the weekend. I will be talking Bitcoin, looking at a quick overview of the charts, as well as Ethereum, Neo, EOS, and Binance Coin. Taking a quick look at the coin market cap, you can see we've been relatively in a tight range, flat here off of the lows, still sub $300 billion, sitting at 281. And today there's been some near-term action coming off of the 1 hour, but not a lot of movement across the board. You can see single-digit percent changes for the most part in most of the big names. Now let's take a quick look at Bitcoin. There is a couple of things I'm watching on Bitcoin here. I did share a chart with my Slack group yesterday talking about once we had the breakdown from the news day, when we had the SEC news that caused the little jump, we were watching this potential bear or bull flag forming, but it just continued to drift lower. And you always got to be looking ahead, right? Remember what I said in the last video? It was potentially a dead cat bounce from oversold conditions, but you're always looking for those reversal patterns to start shaping up if we're going to put in a little bit of a low and see some more upside action in the near term. And so that's what I was looking for here, and started to see potential inverse head and shoulder forming on this Bitcoin 4-hour chart here. And it looks a little bit different on some of the exchanges, but most of them are showing that prices are getting closer to this neckline breakout point. And the way this works is you connect the two shoulder points, and the official breakout point is closing above that neckline there. And you can see we're pretty close here on this chart, which is Binance. On GDAX, Coinbase, it's a little bit further away, but Bitstamp and Bitfinex also have it here pretty close. And that point right now is basically about 65.90, just a little bit higher there. So in and around that zone. But what you want to see is the volume signature. And so let me pull this up a little bit here. Typically on these patterns, the left shoulder and the head of the pattern have the highest volume, and then the volume diminishes going into the right shoulder. So we're starting to see that a little bit, but you do want to see bigger volume if and when it moves out of range here. So that's what I'm going to be paying attention to. And you can do a measured move on these just like some of the other patterns. You take the depth of the head of this pattern to the breakout point and you project that out. And right now that's pointing to around 7,100, sub 7,200, in and around that zone. And that range does line up with a little bit of a resistance point here. You can see we had this small resistance here, and then we have some bigger resistance going back further, sub 73, 7,200 or so. If you look at the daily chart, however, the 10 EMA is right around 6,800. And so that's going to be the first test, then 6,900. And then you can see there is this resistance down here, and that's going to line up to right around 7,100. So that lines up with this potential upside target here. Ultimately, you're going to be looking at the price action. That's just a little bit of a rule of thumb to gauge the potential target there on that pattern. But that's something I'm keeping an eye on here. It's definitely shaping up like a potential here. You can see the RSI on the bottom here still showing that bullish divergence as prices drift lower. RSI is starting to rise a little bit, but that's a little bit of a double-edged sword because it's had time to cool off a little bit as prices have just been in this choppy zone. And so if prices start to sell off, then it gives the RSI room to continue lower before hitting these extreme oversold conditions again. So a little bit of a double-edged sword. RSI is getting a little bit neutral, but looking at the lower lows here, you saw the RSI divergence continue. So if we do roll over and make a new lower low below this 6,200, that's what I'm going to be watching. If this RSI makes another higher low, that's going to be pretty bullish in the near term, just because it's going to signify a potential exhaustion of the sellers. So going into the weekend, next couple of hours, certainly by Monday, Tuesday, I'm going to be watching for two things here: a breakout above this neckline, and if you wanted to be conservative, I would say getting around the lower $6,600 range. And two here is if we close below this most recent low here around $6,300. If it starts to dip below that, then I don't expect this 6,250 to hold. It'll probably be a pretty quick move below that, because that'll be a bearish break of this most recent support. And that would also undercut the strong action that we saw here a couple of days ago on some of that positive SEC news reaction. And so those are the levels to be watching here in the near term. Let's take a quick look at some of the other charts. Looking at Neo. So Neo hit these very oversold conditions here. We did see this bullish divergence forming here as this made a new lower low. A lot of buy volume came in here to really support NEO in and around that 3700. We wish in and around that $37 mark. And so looking at that, I'm watching this retest here. You're seeing the buy volume come back in. It's still below the 10 EMA on that 4 hour, and it's very stretched on the daily. You can see even a very strong bounce would only take it back to that moving average. 10 to 15% bounce would get you there, but it's still stretched to the downside. So I'm looking at that as a potential near-term trade here. A little bit of a double bottom forming, and so keep an eye on that. The official breakout point here on NEO would be getting around that $41 mark or so, and then looking at resistance here around 44 and even as high as $46, $47 if it continues to gain some momentum. Looking at EOS. Now EOS is also forming a potential inverse head and shoulder pattern here on this USD pair. So I'm watching this most recent pullback to see if this is a good low and we start to turn the corner. So the level to hold here in the near term is right around $10.10. And if it starts to march higher, then the 1130 mark or so is going to be that horizontal price resistance. And you can see above that, there's a lot of open space here until you get to around 1280, 1290. And so I'm going to be watching that here for potential quick move to kind of fill this gap here if this turns out to be the most, if this turns out to be a near-term low and potentially forming this right shoulder on this pattern. So this is the EO USD pair. Looking at Ethereum here, also forming a similar pattern. Now this had a stronger move higher on the SEC news, and that was because there was still a little bit of uncertainty around Ethereum security status and whatnot, and that clarity certainly helped. And so this outperformed Bitcoin on the way up during that day, and we've seen this pull back and it's starting to sit tight here now. And so on the downside, the level to watch for support is around $480, and on the upside, if it can start to get back above that 510 mark or so, then I'm going to be paying attention going into 520, because that's also a potential neckline for what could turn out to be a reversal inverse head and shoulder pattern. And finally, Binance Coin has just been the port in the storm during this most recent pullback. You can see this is Binance versus Bitcoin and has just really been resilient and moving higher versus Bitcoin. And so if you look at the USD pair, it's really just been sitting tight and even has been going higher here in the last couple of days. And so just has been resilient in light of some of these pullbacks. Now it is impacted near term. So we saw it happen yesterday when Bitcoin pulled back. This did pull back, but for the most part, it's just kind of been holding up. If you go to the 1 hour chart though, I am starting to keep an eye on here because we're seeing some slight divergence on this 1 hour RSI as it's starting to climb higher. And so maybe it's getting a little exhausted. Maybe we see some rotation come out of Binance here and into some of these other names if the market can get going again. But for now, this has just been very resilient in light of some of the pullbacks we're seeing. But across the board, just looking at some of the alts, many of them are attempting to put these reversal patterns in, these bottoming formations, trying to form some lows here, but we've not seen any confirmation yet across the board. Going back to the Bitcoin daily chart, remember what I mentioned, we still are in this more big picture dominant downtrend. And until that changes, this trend is going to carry the most weight. We may see some positive action in the 1 hour charts and the 4 hour charts. And that's great for the traders. And if you're doing some more short-term trading, there certainly have been some quick opportunities, some short bounces, but we're not getting any of those 20, 30, 40% moves off of the lows. And right now, the overall tone is certainly in favor of the sellers, and we are seeing some positive potential here in the last couple of days of maybe we've established a low, but for now you got to give it the benefit of the doubts. Personally, what I think might happen is we're going to go higher here in the next few days, but I'm going to be watching this downtrend. We may bounce into that target. I'm talking around 7,100 or so, and that may turn out to be that's all it is, and then we will continue lower. So that's what I'm going to be looking for here. This is going to be the first test if we continue higher is, can we start to break this downtrend? And if we do, then we're going to have to retest it by making a higher low on the daily chart and then moving higher. So it has to follow that process. Most markets, I mean, unless there's some major news catalyst or something, they're not going to just come off the bottom and go straight up and clear all the resistance levels and end the bear market in one day. That's just usually not the way it works. Bottoms and tops both are a process that works itself out over a number of days and even a number of weeks in the bigger picture. So that's something we got to keep an eye on here. Going to the weekly chart real quick. This would also support that case if we have a green couple of days here early next week. We could just be bouncing right into the 10 EMA on the weekly chart, which currently sits, in the lower mid 7K mark, and then continue the downside. And we have broken bearish on that symmetrical pattern we were watching, so you have to kind of keep that in mind. We were oversold here near term, and so we're likely to see some bouncing and some upside action in the short run, but ultimately there's no confirmation that the broader downtrend is ending yet. So just keep that in mind. Everyone's going to get all excited if we start bouncing and we start getting above 7,000, and so that's positive. I'm going to get excited too, but you just have to keep in mind the big picture. Certainly the bear has not confirmed that it is over yet, and so just something you got to watch out for. Appreciate you guys watching. Just wanted to drop a quick update here, but I just want to wish you guys all a great rest of your weekend. Happy trading. Until next time, take care, everyone.